There is a sound we all know, the crunch of our own footsteps on a forest path. A sound that tells us we are alive and we are moving forward. But sometimes the forest has a different sound, a different smell. A few years ago, on a walk I never should have taken, my curiosity led me to a scent I can still taste, a thick, sweet, rotting perfume that hung in the air like a curse. It was the smell of death, not as you imagine it, but as it truly is. And what I found was not an end, but a beginning. A beginning of a horror that would follow me out of the woods and into my dreams. If you find yourself drawn to the shadows after dark, consider subscribing for more tales that linger long after the story is over. The memory always starts with my feet on the gravel. It was one of those perfect autumn afternoons where the sun is a weak gold and the air has just enough bite to make you feel awake. Truly awake. I had strayed from the main path, the one families use on weekends, the one worn smooth by 1,000 hiking boots. I wanted the silence, the feeling of being the only person in the world. The further I walked, the more the world seemed to close in. The trees grew thicker, their branches weaving a tangled roof above me. The light turned a deep, watery green, and the sounds of the road faded into a distant hum, and then into nothing. It was a peaceful nothing at first, a blanket of quiet that felt like a secret just for me. I remember stopping to listen to that silence, to feel the cool air on my skin. I took a deep, clean breath, filling my lungs with the scent of damp earth and pine. And that's when I caught it, the first hint of something else, something that didn't belong. It was faint, almost like overripe fruit left too long in a hot kitchen. A cloying sweetness that tickled the back of my throat. It was a smell that promised something hidden just out of sight. My curiosity, that simple, human urge to know, prickled at me. It was a feeling I would come to regret for the rest of my life. A feeling that started me walking, step by step, off the path and into a nightmare. The smell grew with every step. It wasn't a faint suggestion anymore. It was a presence. A thick, heavy perfume that clung to the inside of my nose, that coated my tongue. It was the smell of a garbage bin in mid-July, of spoiled meat, but underneath it all was that undeniable, nauseating sweetness. It was the smell of life leaving. My heart began to beat a little faster, a dull thud in my chest. My peaceful walk was gone, replaced by a growing sense of dread. My eyes scanned the forest floor, looking for the source. A dead animal, I told myself. A deer, maybe a fox. It had to be. The woods were full of them. But this smell was bigger. It was overwhelming. The flies confirmed it. A low, buzzing cloud of them, a dark, vibrating hum that seemed to emanate from a thicket of ferns and thorny bushes up ahead. They formed a living, shifting curtain. I should have turned back. Every sane instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, to leave this place and its horrible smell behind. But my feet kept moving as if pulled by an invisible string. I was compelled. I needed to see. I needed to know what could create such a horrible, fascinating odor. I pushed aside a low-hanging branch, the leaves slick with moisture. I took one more step, my boot sinking into the soft earth, and I pulled back the green, leafy veil of the undergrowth. My eyes took a second to adjust, to understand the shapes and colors that didn't make sense. And then, all at once, they did. The world stopped. The buzzing of the flies became the only sound in the universe. He was nestled in the ferns like some terrible, overripe fruit. The body of a man, but not a man anymore. Death had reshaped him. His skin was a palette of colors that should never be on a human being, a deep, bruised green, a waxy black, and patches of a sickly, swollen purple. His face was a distorted moon, bloated and unrecognizable, the features pulled tight and lost in the puffiness. His clothes were strained against his body, and I could see where things had leaked. Dark, runny stains seeped into the soil around him. The wildlife had been there. I don't want to describe the details, but the evidence was plain. This wasn't a scene from a movie. It was real, and it was visceral, and it was the most horrifying thing I had ever seen. My brain short-circuited. There was no scream. There was no sound at all from me. I just stood there, frozen, my hand still holding back the branch, my lungs refusing to draw breath, because to breathe was to taste him. The sweet, rotting smell was inside me now. It was a part of me. Time seemed to stretch and warp. I don't know how long I stood there, just staring, trying to make my mind accept what my eyes were seeing. This was a person. Someone with a name, a life, a story. And his story had ended here, in this lonely, hidden place. My body finally broke from its paralysis with a violent shudder. I stumbled backward, fumbling in my pocket for my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely press the 3 numbers that would change everything. The voice on the other end of the phone was calm, professional, a lifeline to a world that still made sense. I stammered out my location, my words tumbling over each other. A body, I said, my voice cracking. In the woods. I found a body. The dispatcher asked me to stay on the line. She asked me to confirm where I was. And then she said the words that sent a fresh, cold wave of terror through me. I need you to stay where you are. Do not leave the scene. An officer is on the way. Stay. The word echoed in my head. Stay here? With that? I wanted to argue, to scream that I couldn't, that it was impossible. But the voice was so sure, so authoritative. My duty as a citizen, a bizarre and cruel responsibility, was to stand guard over this horrific secret. I hung up and slid down the trunk of a tree, landing hard on the ground. I wrapped my arms around my knees, making myself as small as possible. I couldn't look at the ferns, but I could feel the presence from behind them. I could smell it. I could hear the flies. So I stared in the opposite direction, back the way I had come, praying for the sight of a uniform, for the sound of a crackling radio, for anything that meant I wasn't alone in this green, silent hell. The sun was dipping lower in the sky, and the long, skeletal fingers of the tree's shadows began to stretch across the forest floor, reaching for me. The temperature began to drop. I pulled my jacket tighter, but the cold was coming from inside me. I was shivering, and I knew I wouldn't stop for a long, long time. The forest at night is a different world. A world of shapes and sounds. The weak gold light faded, replaced by a deep, inky blue, and then by an absolute blackness that felt heavy, like a blanket smothering me. The police were taking too long. I was alone in the consuming dark with a dead man. My phone flashlight was a pathetic, tiny beacon, its beam shaking as my hand trembled. It only made the shadows deeper, more menacing. Every rustle of leaves was a footstep. Every snap of a twig was someone or something closing in. The sounds of the night animals started up, an orchestra of unseen life moving all around me. But my mind wasn't thinking of animals. It was thinking of him, just a few yards away, lying in the dirt. What if he moved? What if he sat up? I knew it was impossible, but the dark has a way of making the impossible feel probable. The smell was worse in the cold air, sharper. It felt like it was seeping into my clothes, my hair, my very skin. I was marinating in the scent of death. I started to talk to myself, Just quiet, nonsense whispers, just to hear a human voice. I counted the seconds. I tried to remember song lyrics, but my mind was a blank slate of fear. The only thing that was clear was the image of his swollen, discolored face, burned onto the back of my eyelids. When I closed my eyes, he was there. When I opened them, he was just behind that wall of darkness. We were two companions in that awful place, forced together by a terrible accident. I was the unwilling guardian of his final resting place, and with every passing minute in that profound dark, I felt a new, chilling thought take root. Maybe I was disturbing him. Maybe he didn't want a guardian at all. When the police finally arrived, their flashlights cutting through the trees like sabers of pure white light, I nearly wept with relief. The ordeal was over. They took my statement, their faces grim and professional under the beam of their lights. They taped off the area, their voices low and serious. A detective told me it looked like a suicide. He had been there for a while. They thanked me for waiting, for doing the right thing. I went home. I took the longest, hottest shower of my life, scrubbing my skin until it was raw, trying to wash the smell and the feeling away. I collapsed into my bed, exhausted down to my bones, believing the horror was behind me. I was wrong. That was when he decided to introduce himself. The first dream was simple. I was back in the woods, but it was different. The trees were closer, their branches like grasping arms. And he was there, standing where his body had lain. He wasn't swollen or disfigured anymore. He was just a man, pale and translucent, his form shimmering like heat haze. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at me. And his eyes, they were full of a deep, profound sadness that felt heavier than any emotion I had ever known. I woke up gasping, my heart hammering, the sheets damp with sweat. It was just a dream, I told myself. A natural reaction to a traumatic event. My brain was processing. But the next night, he was back. And this time, the sadness in his eyes was gone, replaced by something else. Something colder. Something angrier. He took a step towards me in the dream, and his mouth opened. And that's when I heard it. The first whisper. A sound that was not a sound. A voice that filled my head from the inside. The whispers weren't loud, but they were clear, as if someone was speaking directly into my ear in a silent room. At first, they were just fragments. You saw me. Then you shouldn't have looked. The dreams became a nightly ritual. I would find myself in that forest clearing, and he would be waiting. He never touched me. He just stood there, and he talked. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, and yet it carried a weight of immense resentment. I was at peace, he whispered one night. I was hidden. I was done. And then you came, with your noise, and your curiosity. I started to dread going to sleep. I would drink coffee until late, watch mindless television, do anything to stay out of my bedroom, to avoid the certain journey back to those woods. But eventually, exhaustion would always win. And he would be there. My waking life began to suffer. I was tired all the time, jumping at shadows. The smell of anything sweet, a ripe banana, a scented candle, would send a jolt of panic through me. I was a ghost in my own life, haunted by a ghost of my own making. Or was it my own making? The line between nightmare and reality began to blur. I'd be doing the dishes, and for a split second, I'd see his pale face reflected in the kitchen window. I'd hear a muffled sound from another room, and my blood would run cold, convinced it was that same, flat whisper. He was no longer confined to my dreams. He was leaking out. He was becoming a permanent resident in my mind, an unwelcome guest who had followed me home from the woods and was now making himself comfortable. The tone of the whispers changed. The quiet resentment curdled into pure, undiluted anger. The man in my dreams was no longer a sad, lost soul. He was a furious, vengeful spirit. His form seemed darker, more solid. The air in the dream would grow cold, and the forest around us would wither, the leaves turning black and falling like ashes. "You disturbed me." His voice would hiss, no longer a whisper, but a sharp, psychic knife. "You brought them. You let them see me. You ruined it." I began to plead with him in these dreams. "I'm sorry," I would cry out. "I didn't know. I was just walking." But my apologies only seemed to fuel his rage. He would drift closer, his face now contorted with a hatred so pure it was terrifying. And then came the night he delivered his command. He stood directly in front of me, so close I could feel the unnatural cold radiating from him. He pointed a thin, pale finger at my chest. His eyes were black pits. "You don't deserve to be here," he spat. "You don't deserve the light, the air. You took my peace. Now I will take yours." He leaned forward, and his next words were etched into my mind with the clarity of a scalpel. "You should have done it right. You should have joined me. Finish it." The message was unmistakable. He was telling me, commanding me, to kill myself. I woke up screaming, a real, raw scream that tore from my throat and echoed through my silent, dark apartment. I scrambled out of bed, turning on every light I could find, my body trembling uncontrollably. This was no longer just a bad dream. This was a threat. It felt real. It felt personal. And a terrifying part of me was starting to believe him. I didn't sleep for 2 days after that. I was too afraid. How do you fight an enemy that lives inside your own head? I thought about getting help, but what would I say? That a dead man was telling me to kill myself in my dreams? They would label me unstable, a suicide risk. Maybe I was. The lack of sleep and the constant fear were unraveling me. I was a shell, jumping at my own reflection. The world outside my window seemed muted, gray, and far away. The horror of finding the body was nothing compared to the horror of this psychological siege. He had invaded me. The memory of his decomposed body was now less frightening than the living, breathing hatred of his spirit. I started sleeping with the lights on, but it didn't matter. Exhaustion is a relentless hunter. Eventually, I slept, and he was there waiting. But he wasn't angry this time. He was just present, a silent, watching shadow at the edge of the dream forest. His presence was a constant, chilling reminder. He didn't need to speak his command anymore. I knew what he wanted. The thought was there, a dark little seed that had been planted in the fertile soil of my terror. It would whisper to me when I was tired, when I felt weak. What if it would be easier? What if it would make the dream stop? What if he was right? I had to fight those thoughts with every ounce of my will. I had to remind myself that he was a memory, a trauma, a fragment of my own mind. But the conviction in his dead eyes felt more real than the floor beneath my feet. He had left a stain on my soul, and I wasn't sure I would ever be clean again. Time has passed. The sharp, jagged edge of the terror has dulled into a constant, low hum of dread. I function. I go to work. I see my friends. I laugh sometimes. But he is always there, a cold spot in the back of my mind. The dreams are less frequent now, but they have never stopped. He still visits. Sometimes he is the angry shadow. Sometimes he is just the sad man. Sometimes he doesn't appear at all, but the dream will simply carry the texture of that day, the green light, the smell of damp earth, and that underlying, sickening sweetness. I know, logically, that it was probably just my brain's way of processing a profound trauma. I know that. But in the quiet hours of the night, logic holds no power. In those moments, I believe. I believe I disturbed something that was never meant to be found. I believe I invited a presence back with me from the edge of death. And I believe that presence is still waiting, patient, biding its time. He is a part of my story now, a character in the narrative of my life. Or perhaps I became a part of his. Our stories became tangled in that clearing, and I don't think they will ever be separate again. I am telling you this story now, and I know what it will do. I know that by speaking it aloud, by dragging this memory back into the light, I am inviting him back. The sun has set outside my window. The room is growing dark. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that when I close my eyes tonight, the dream will not be far behind. It is an unfinished dream. And I fear it always will be,